G'day everyone, my name is Hoy, and in this video I'm going to show you how to make paper tears dynamically in Photoshop, and it's as easy as painting it on. Now if you want to follow along, the links to all the images that I'll be using are in the description. What's not in the description are the actual brushes. Now the first step to this is to make the actual brushes. Now I'm just going to go to this tab up here, and these are the materials that I use to make the brushes. As you can see that there are some masks here, and basically this is what I use to make the brushes. So if I just zoom in here, I've got another picture of the blue mask here. You can see that the blue mask is made out of 3 layers here. So if you've got a different lining, this white one here and the other more translucent layer here, and then the blue one here. If I zoom in a little bit, the reason why I like it is that it's not a solid piece of material. It is actually translucent. So that is what I like about it. It gives that the realistic paper texture when we paint over it. The other reason why I like this fibrous material is that you can see these threads here. Now if I just zoom in a little bit more, you can see these little threads here. It actually provides more realistic texture and it simulates the paper tear here. So for those 2 reasons, that's why I like the materials of the mask. So I've got the black one here as well, so let me just zoom out here. Now the black one is just all the same, but it's made out of a different material. This one's a lot thinner, the lining, so it's got a lot more fibrous threads here. And then if I just scroll across, I've just ripped it with my hands, actually just pinched it so it's an irregular shape, and this is what we actually want. You might have thought to create a paper tear you would have to use actual paper. Now you can use that, but what I find is that for the style that I'm going for, I don't want a solid hard effect. I just want a sort of a translucent effect with these fibers out here. What I've done after ripping my masks, I scanned them into the computer. Now, if you don't have a scanner, you can just take it with your phone. Just make sure that you're not, creating your own shadow if you're hunched over a light or if there's direct sunlight. One issue that I want to highlight that I had is that my scanner had a white backing. You can see that when I scanned this blue piece here, that the blue, there's not a lot of contrast in this image here. Now you might say, well, this is okay, but what we need to do is to mask out what we want as the brush here. So this is not an impossible task to mask out, but we want to make it as easy as possible for us. As I mentioned, the blue is not too bad, but when I use let me just turn off this layer here, you see when I scan white on white, it becomes a lot harder to mask out later. So we don't want to create extra work for ourselves. What I did was just simply put a black piece of paper behind it before I scan. So when I scanned it, this is the effect, and then this is the white one here. Let me just turn off all the other ones. So then when we mask it, Photoshop's going to have an easier time to mask that out. So let me just go to the actual file that I scanned into the computer, because that's probably where you're going to follow along from. So let's go to File, Open, and the one that I'm going to use is blue mask white one here. So I've scanned all sorts of images here, so you can see that I've got different samples scanned in, but the one that I'm going to use is this one here. So let me just cancel out of that, and I'm just going to click and drag it on top of this toolbar here, and then cancel that. So let me zoom in a little bit. So Option and scroll wheel mouse up. If you're on a PC, that's Alt and scroll wheel mouse up. The first step that we need to do is to mask this out. So there's a number of ways you can do it. What I'm going to do is use the color range method. So let's go to Select, click on Color Range. I've got select sample colors, just going to move this out of the way. Fuzziness of 40, so you can play around with the fuzziness, which affects the selection that you make. And I've got selection preview set to grayscale. So this little screen here is replicated here. So yours is probably on none, then you'll see your actual image. But if you actually want to see a larger version of this, you can just select grayscale. This looks good to me, so I'm not going to change any of those settings, and I'm going to press OK. And now it's made that selection. I'm going to make a mask out of that, so let's just click on this adjustment layer, mask adjustment layer here. And here we can't really see what it's selected, so it looks like everything else is gone except this. So to make sure that we can see properly what has been masked, we can go to our mask icon here, press Option or Alt, and then click on this thumbnail here, and then this is just a bigger version of this thumbnail. Now you can see if I just scroll in a little bit that although it's small scale, it looked like it had done a perfect masking, but you can see here that there's specks of white here. So what I'm going to do is just quickly clean it up, just on the immediate edges around this sample image here. So I don't really care about all this here because I'm just going to mask that out as well. So I'm going to grab my brush, B for the brush, and you can see that I was playing around with it before. So I'm just going to change it to a brush that all of you will have, which is the hard round brush, and just going to click outside of that. I'm going to resize that a little bit. What I'm going to do is make sure that I'm on my mask layer here, and then my foreground color is black. At the moment it is my background color, so I can press X on my keyboard or press this double-headed arrow here. So all I'm going to do is just mask out all the specks of white that I don't want in my brush. So I'll just spend some time doing that, and I'll see you back when I'm finished. Now that we've done, I'm just going to exit out of this mask view. So I'm going to go back to this mask thumbnail, Option or Alt, and then just click on that, and that will return it back to the image. This is a little bit hard to see. I'm going to put a background behind this. So let's go to our adjustment layer icon, and what we're going to do is create a solid color layer here. And why don't we choose something like yellow? Press OK. I'm going to click and drag it so it's below that. Now I can see it here. So you can see that there is some transparency, some translucency, I should say, and that's exactly what we want. I don't want a full opaque brush here, and you'll see why. It creates this very nice textured brush when you are done with it. The next step is that I'm going to just play around with the darkness levels. So to do that, I'm going to go to my adjustment layer and select levels, and just have a play around with it and see whether I want to darken it, and you can just play around with it. So I wanted a fairly light one. Again, I'm going for this translucent look. I'm just going to adjust this a little bit here, something like this. I'm just going to turn this off so we can see it against the transparency background. Now, if your sample material is not black or white, what we want to do is desaturate it, because in a brush what we want is black is for what the brush will actually paint, and then white is what won't paint. So any shades in between will be some level of transparency. So if you've got a pink material, then you need to desaturate it. So to desaturate it, click on the material layer and then press Command and Control U to bring up our hue saturation adjustment, and then you can just dial down the saturation all the way down to -100 and then press OK. I don't think there was any change to my image. That's because it was already desaturated. So now the next step is to make a selection out of this, right? So I'm just going to turn this back on again, just so I can see where all the threads are. So I'm going to use my freeform lasso tool here, or you could have pressed L on your keyboard. I'm going to make a selection, a rough selection around this, and basically I'm telling Photoshop, whatever I selected, that's the brush that I want. So I want to go fairly close to the image, but not too close so I don't accidentally cut off some of the fibers. Now, so the next step is to turn this off, this layer off. If I don't turn it off, it's going to accept that the yellow is also part of the brush. So I don't want that. Now that I've turned it off, let's go to Edit and let's go to Define Brush Preset. So it's going to ask for a name, so you can put any name that you want. I'm going to put HTP, How to Photoshop, and I'm going to press type paper tear and press OK. And now immediately you get this brush here. So I'm not going to work on this document here. So I'm going to create a new canvas. So I can do that by pressing Command or Control N. And that will bring up the new document icon, menu, I should say. Now, I've already played around with this, so I've got a custom size of this 1920 by 1080. If you want to follow exactly the dimensions, you can put it in here, 1920 pixels by 1080. You don't need to copy it. It's really just a scrap piece of paper that I want to test my brush on, so don't feel like you need to copy exactly what these settings are. I'm going to click on Create. And immediately you can see that the size of the brush is a little bit too big. So I'm going to just reduce that again. So I'm actually pressing Control, Option, left click, and then just dragging my mouse to the left to resize it smaller. And then I drag it to the right to make it bigger. If you're on a PC, that is Alt right click on your mouse and then dragging your mouse left to right to resize it smaller or larger. So something like this would do. And with black as my foreground color, I'm just going to test it out. So you can see that this is my paintbrush, and if I just click and drag, that's the effect that I have. That's not nearly as exciting as this effect here, right? So it's not uniform as what you saw here. So we have to adjust some of these settings. I'm going to go to my brush settings. Now I've already got it here in my taskbar here, but you can bring it up by pressing F5, or you could have went to Windows and then just click on brush settings here. This is where we're going to change some of the settings here. So let's click on brush tip shape, and we're not going to change anything here. I just wanted to show you the options here. So shape dynamic, we're going to change the size jitter. And what this means is basically how much variation of the brush size are we going to let it have. So at the extreme, we're going to let it have 100% variation. So it will be one could be tiny, and then if you click on it, it could be tiny. The next one could be smaller, bigger, etc. So that's the variation, right? So we don't want it that big. I'm going to do something like 30, maybe 40. We're going to leave minimum diameter as it is, and we're going to play around with the angle jitter. And basically, just like the size jitter, it's how much of the angle can jitter, which is how much variation of the angle in the brush can we allow it. So let's say give it 20%. There's no science to this. It's just clicking and basically having a look at whether it suits your needs. So 20% is what looks good to me. The last thing that we're going to do is dual brush. So make sure that you click on the word dual brush, not just on the check mark here. I should have also mentioned it in the shape dynamics. When you click on the shape dynamics, I should say, make sure you click on the label and not the check mark. If you only tick the check mark, it will just apply what you have already under these settings, but you won't see those settings. So you see that if I just turn it on and off, it will just apply whatever options that I have. But if I click on the word itself, the label, I can see all these options. So going back to dual brush, let's click on the name or the label. And what this means is that I need to click another brush. And you're going to say, well, hang on, why am I clicking on another brush? Didn't we just spend all this time, masking and selecting and making this thing at a brush? Well, what dual brush does is that this original brush here will actually act as a mask for this second brush. And the purpose of that is to give more variation to your brush. I know that probably didn't make any sense whatsoever if you're new to brushes, so let me just click outside of this and then try to explain it with a brand new brush. So I'm going to press Command N, or that's Control N if you're on a PC, just to bring up a new document here. And I'm going to use a round brush. So I'll just right click on the canvas and I'm just going to go up and click on the hard round brush here. So click outside of this, and then if I just click and drag, that's the effect that I get, right? Nothing too spectacular. Now if I press F5 to bring up my brush settings and then click on dual brush, the words, not the check mark. Now, if I select a brush that is very obviously different, maybe this sort of drip brush here, what that is doing is creating this brush within this shape here. So let me just demonstrate it instead of just talking about it. It might make a little bit more sense. So just dial down that size of that brush here, this drip brush, and then now it doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? Because my blend mode is set to the default of color burn. So let's change that to multiply. And now we can see the effect clearer here. So I should have created a layer here instead of painting directly on the background. So let me just undo that and then create a new layer. And let's do that again. So now if I click and drag, you can see that the dual brush, the second brush, is actually being painted on, but within the confines of the hard round brush. So if I demonstrate it, so if I just click on this red color here, you can imagine that the shape of here, this is the shape of the hard round brush. And the dual brush is actually creating, the second brush I should say, is actually being stamped, if you like, within the first brush, if that makes any sense. I will explain it in a slightly different way if you haven't understood that. So let me just go back to my scribble. Let's go back to our brush settings. So who can remember what it is? It is F5 to bring up the brush settings. So remember, we've got our dual brush as this. So let me just demonstrate it a little bit more. So if I increase that brush size again, and then if I just go out, space it out a little bit more, right, you can see that the second brush, the dual brush, is being painted on within the confines of the first brush, of this brush here. So I've just cleared all my settings, so let me just do it again. So remember, we went to Shape Dynamics, we turned on our size jitter to, what was it? Was it 40? I think it was 40. And then our angle to about 20. And then scattering, did we do scattering? I'm not sure, but we can do it here. Scattering is basically how much you can deviate on the Y and X axis. So I'm just going to click on both axes, something like this, maybe 30%, 33%. And let's go back to our dual brush and let's click on here. So if I go back to our scattering, you see that it's actually, this brush is being stamped on within the confines of the first brush, and that's what it's doing. That's two explanations. Hopefully you understood what the dual brush setting does. So let me just move this spacing back a little bit, and maybe we don't want that bigger scattering. So something like this looks good to me. And once we're done with it, let's test that out first, and let's resize the brush a little bit smaller. We've run out of room, but something like this, and that looks good to me. Somehow my brush turned red, so I don't want that, so I'm just going to undo a little bit. And let's press D on our keyboard to reset the colors, and let's try again. And this is what looks good to me, right? You can always play around with the settings by going back to the brush settings, but I actually didn't want this drip brush effect to happen. What I want is actually 189. Now this 189 is what I created earlier. What you need to do if you're following along is to create two brushes, and then once you've got the second brush, you can just click on that very same brush there. So let's test it again. just somewhere there, and that looks a little bit better. Now that we've set it up, we obviously don't want to do all that every time we create a brush. So what we want to do is save a preset. So in this hamburger menu, let's click on this and then click on this new brush preset. So I'm just going to delete that. This number here looks a little bit random, but what that is the pixel size of the longest length. So on the longest length from here to there, that's 338 pixels here. Now the settings here I've got is capture brush size in preset, which I've got, and then I've just got include in the tool settings. I haven't clicked on include color, so if you created this as a bright pink, for example, and if you want to carry that setting across so that when every time that you use that brush it has this bright pink, then you check this box, which I'm not going to. I'm going to press OK. And now let's go back to our image here. So the image that we started off with, remember, is this lady here. So let's start off afresh. So let's go to File, Open. And now we're going to go outside of this and go to Images and go to Pixels, Mateos Souza. Now I've also linked all these other ones in the description, so for the time being just press on this one here, click open, and there you have the image of the lady. I'm not so sure why she's crying. I hope she's doing well, but it's the image that we're using. Now the first step that we're going to do is make a mask on this background layer here. So click on our mask here. Now if your brush isn't selected, make sure that it's selected. So press B on your keyboard, or you can press here. If it's still not selected, go to your brush here. And if you don't see it, you can go to Window and just make sure that brush is selected here. Now, once you've got that, it's usually the last one that you made is usually all the way down the bottom. So just scroll all the way down the bottom. This is the last one we made. Just click on that. And this is my brush here. Let me just close that. I'm just going to mask out where I want the tears. So I've got a white mask here. So I want black here because I'm wanting to hide the information. So if you don't have black, press D on your keyboard and then switch it around by pressing X. I'm just going to resize this a little bit bigger so it's somewhat is around about the size of her lips, and then just going to paint across her mouth, so just to give the effect that she's someone's silencing her, and that's why she's crying. So we have our imaginations to make up anything that we want to. That has cut out all the way to the transparency layer. So what we need to do is put something behind that. So let's go to File, go to Embedded, Place Embedded, and what we're going to do is place this Pixels Resource Boy here as the background. So let's press on Place. We don't need it to cover the whole canvas. All we want to cover is the little gap that we just created. So I'm just going to turn it around. I'm pressing Shift to snap it into 15-degree increments. Just going to move it down a little bit. Now if you can't see it, you can adjust the opacity here, and then I can sort of squash it down here, move it however I want. And the goal is just basically to have this transparent area covered. Once we're okay with that, I'm going to press return on my keyboard. If you're on a PC, let's press enter to accept that change. Remember to bump up the opacity all the way to 100%. And we want this layer to be down the bottom. So click and drag. The next step is to create the paper texture. Now we're not going to create it actually, we're going to bring in another image. So let's go to File, Place Embedded, and I think it's this one, and press Place. Again, same as the background here, what we want to do is just drag it over this area here, just to make sure that the whole transparent area is covered. Once we're okay, let's press enter. And now we have to mask this out because we don't want this whole thing to have this paper texture here. But instead of using a white mask, we're going to have a negative mask. So let's press Option or Alt and then press this layer mask icon here. And then make sure that your brush is selected. And now make sure that it's got white as a foreground here. So I've just clicked on the double-headed arrow. Make sure that your mask is selected and then just paint over this, and look at that. That is paper tear at your fingertips. Isn't that fantastic? It's brilliant. Now, if you made a mistake, all you need to do is have black selected as your foreground color. You can do that by pressing X on the keyboard and then just erase that away, right? So nice and easy. So I don't want that actually, so I'm just going to press undo and then just set my foreground color to white again. This already looks pretty good. I'm just going to clean that up a little bit. But what's missing here is a little bit of shadow. So what I'm going to do is add shadow to this layer here. So I'm going to use this FX button here, and then I'm going to choose outer glow. Now you could have used drop shadow. It doesn't really matter. In this instance, I've just used outer glow. You can copy my settings. I've got blend mode as multiply, got black as my color. If you don't have black, just click on that little swatch here and just make sure that it's black. Or you could pick any color actually. You don't need it to be black. And then I've just mucked around with the spread and the size of this, which is why you see this effect here. So I'm going to press OK here. And the great thing is that if I make sure that my mask is selected and white is my foreground color, I can continue to paint on this tear effect, and it will still have this shadow here, as you can see if I just change my cursor to a move tool, right? And that's how you create a dynamic paper tear effect in Photoshop. Now, if you learned something new or enjoyed the video, make sure you let me know about it in the comments by commenting, liking, subscribing, and hitting the bell icon so you can get notified for when the next video is out.